She survived loneliness for 8 years, but she couldn't survive 1 month on Facebook. In the winter of 2019, a 59-year-old grandmother from Brisbane clicked accept on a friend request. 32 days later, police found her body in a motel room 400 kilometers from home. How did this happen? How did a simple online connection turn deadly? What started as a search for companionship ended in a cold, isolated room. This is the story of how one innocent, like one seemingly harmless interaction, became the gateway to her demise. Stick with me. You won't believe what comes next. Her name was Fiona Margaret Hughes. Born October 3, 1960 in the coastal town of Bunbury, Queensland, to a family that believed in hard work, Sunday roasts, and looking after your mates. She grew up with the salt of the earth, a family that valued loyalty and togetherness, where everyone had their role, and the world seemed simple. Her father, a dock worker, spent his days loading and unloading cargo under the sweltering Australian sun. Her mother worked in the school cafeteria, always smiling and ready to make sure no child left hungry. Fiona, she was the middle child, always looking out for her older and younger siblings, making sure no one was ever left behind. She was known for her infectious laugh, the kind that could brighten up any room. She was the one who baked legendary pizzas at Christmas and always remembered everyone's birthday. No matter how busy life got, Fiona was the glue that held her family together. But somewhere along the way, that bond began to unravel. She was more than just a mother, more than just a sister. She was a woman who deserved so much more than what she was about to find. At 27, Fiona left her small-town roots and moved to Brisbane. Seeking a fresh start in the bustling city, she found her place as a primary school teacher, dedicating 28 years to shaping young minds. It was in Brisbane that she met Trevor Hughes, a hard-working plumber with a big heart. They married in 1985, building a life together filled with love and promise. Their home was modest, nestled in the quiet suburb of Carindale, but it was stable. They lived a simple life, one filled with routines, laughter, and shared memories. Fiona was the kind of woman who made everything feel just right. But in August 2011, everything collapsed. One quiet afternoon, Trevor, at just 56, suffered a fatal stroke while fixing a water heater. In an instant, Fiona, at 51, became a widow, grief sweeping over her like a storm she never saw coming. In one tragic moment, everything she knew, her life, her love, her future, was shattered. Fiona was left to pick up the pieces of a life she never imagined she'd have to live alone. After Trevor's death, Fiona buried herself in teaching, immersing herself in the lives of her students to numb the itch that never seemed to leave her. She threw herself into lesson plans, school events, and endless paperwork, hoping that if she kept busy enough, she wouldn't have to face the silence at home. As the years passed, her children Oliver and Sophie grew up and moved away. Oliver to Melbourne, Sophie to Perth. Her home grew quieter, emptier. The phone calls and occasional visits weren't enough to fill the space left behind. In early 2018, after 28 years off teaching, Fiona retired, exhausted, drained from the emotional weight of her loss. But retirement didn't bring peace. It only deepened her solitude. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom unit, surrounded by silence, with nothing but the ticking off the clock to remind her of time passing by. Friends started to notice the change. Fiona's isolation became harder to ignore. The woman who once filled every room with laughter now barely left her unit. Her world had become small, and as the days turned into months, she began to lose her connection with everything and everyone. By late 2018, the silence had become unbearable. Fiona's days blended together, each one feeling like a repeat of the last. Her neighbor Patricia later recalled Fiona saying, "Some mornings I wake up and realize I haven't spoken to another soul in 3 days. The walls feel like they're closing in." Loneliness was no longer just a feeling. It was a presence that lingered in every corner, in every room. Fiona began to long for more than just the occasional phone call. She needed connection. She needed to be seen again. Then on January 11, 2019, after a video call with her daughter Sophie, who gently urged her to try something new, Fiona did something that terrified her. She created a Facebook profile. Her profile photo, a picture from her granddaughter's spirit party, wearing a floral blouse and her warmest smile. It was a moment captured in time, a reminder of who she once was before the loneliness set in. Her bio was heartbreakingly simple. Retired teacher, love gardening and old films. Looking to make new friends and maybe find someone to share a couple with. She wasn't chasing adventure. She was looking for thrills. She wanted what she'd had with Trevor. Someone to talk to over breakfast. Someone to hold her hand during the evening news. She wasn't seeking excitement, just companionship, a quiet life filled with simple moments. But what she didn't know was that her loneliness, her honesty, her open heart, these weren't just threats to the right kind of predator. They were targets, the kind of vulnerability that invited someone to slip past her defenses without her ever noticing. And on February 4th, 2019, that predator sent her a friend request. His Facebook profile said his name was Anthony Grant. The truth, however, was far more complicated. His actual name was Dylan Ray Fletcher, born May 18, 1975 in the rough western suburbs of Sydney, Australia. The third of four boys in a household where violence was the primary language and neglect was the only constant. His father was an alcoholic and out of prison, leaving Dylan to fend for himself. His mother, overwhelmed by the constant struggle, worked 3 jobs and was rarely home. It was a life that bred survival, and Dylan quickly learned how to manipulate those around him to get what he wanted. By the age of 16, Dylan had been sent to juvenile detention for armed robbery. It was clear that a pattern had been set early. Charm, manipulation, and when those failed, violence. His criminal history was long and checkered. In 1995, he was charged with assault following a violent domestic dispute. 3 years later, in 1998, a fraud conviction for credit card theft added to his record. By 2003, his ex-girlfriend had filed a restraining order against him after he threatened her with a knife. From 2007 to 2012, he racked up multiple fraud charges across New South Wales and Victoria. Finally, in 2015, he was released after serving an 18-month sentence for identity theft. A forensic psychologist while later reviewed his case file described him as a textbook predator, superficially charming, fundamentality, and driven by a need to control through any means necessary. By 2019, Dylan had refined his method to science. He created multiple Facebook profiles, each carefully crafted to appeal to different types of women. Anthony Grant was his latest creation, designed specifically for one target demographic. Older, recently widowed, financially stable women. He stole photos from a young businessman's LinkedIn account, creating a believable persona. His fabricated, a consultant in renewable energy, something professional with a hint of social responsibility. Age listed as 49. Just young enough to be approachable, but not so young as to seem threatening. Location: Brisbane, close enough to meet. And of course, his profile was filled with inspirational quotes about second chances, always appealing to someone yearning for hope after loss. Had joined Facebook groups for Brisbane singles, over 50 widows support groups and gardening communities. He watched, he studied, he waited for the right victim. His strategy was simple: blend in, be charming, and gain trust before striking. On February 4th, 2019, when he saw Fiona's profile in a Brisbane gardening enthusiast group, he recognized exactly what he'd been looking for: a woman who, despite the warmth she exuded, had been left to navigate her life alone. And at 8:47 p.m. that night, he sent her a message that would set everything in motion. The message was short, disarming, perfectly calculated. Notice how carefully it was crafted. A reference to a deceased print, creating an instant connection through shared grief and empathy. The mention of a shared interest: heirloom tomatoes, seemingly bridges the gap between two strangers. His tone is polite, non-threatening, asking for permission before continuing that conversation. It was the perfect hook. 23 minutes later, Fiona replied. She thanked him for the kind words, asked about his mother, and shared tips for growing tomatoes in Brisbane's humidity. It was a simple, warm exchange, exactly what Dylan had hoped for. To Fiona, It seemed like a genuine conversation to people, with common ground. Little did she know, it was just the beginning of an intricate web of lies Dylan was weaving around her. What started as garden chat quickly deepened. Within 3 days, they were messaging every morning and every night. What began with heirloom tomatoes turned into late-night discussions about her career, her children, her loss. The conversation was no longer about plants. It was about her life, her past, her pain. Dylan was no mature. He knew how to manipulate, how to mirror her grief, and use it to pull her closer. I lost my wife to cancer 5 years ago. He told her the loneliness never really goes away. He validated her feelings, telling her, you're not tooled for connection. That's nonsense. Yao have so much to offer. He made her believe that despite everything, she still had worth, still had the ability to be loved. Then came the urgency. Life taught me not to waste time, Dylan wrote. When you meet someone special, you know it. He didn't just want her to feel connected. He wanted her to believe that time was running out, that she couldn't afford to wait. By the end of the first week, Fiona had already opened up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone in years. Dylan had expertly tapped into her deepest fears and desires, and with every message, he tightened his grip just a little bit more. By February 18th, they were speaking on the phone. Sophie later obtained Fiona's phone records for 7 calls in just 10 days, some lasting over 2 hours. Then came the love bombing. Every day there was a new message. Good morning, beautiful. Compliments poor Dan. Your smile could light up a room. He made her feel seen, adored, like she was the most important person in the world. He even started making future plans. I'd love to take you to that Italian restaurant you mentioned, he said, planting the seeds of a future together. But with every sweet word, he continued to share his own emotional vulnerability, weaving fake stories about his loneliness to make her feel needed. But there were cracks, small inconsistencies Fiona overlooked because she wanted so badly to believe. Red flags that in her heart she refused to see. These were warning signs that any other person might have noticed, but Fiona, drawn in by the kindness, the tension, the hope, ignored them. On February 22nd, Fiona mentioned her concerns to Patricia over tea. Patricia later told police. She said something felt off, but then she'd shake her head and say, maybe I'm just paranoid. He's been nothing but kind. On February 8th, Dylan made his move. Toowoomba was 125 kilometers from Brisbane, just far enough to isolate her from any support system she might have had. A weekend trip meant extended time for control, the perfect setup for Dylan, and the offer of separate rooms sounded respectful, even considerate. But the truth was, Dylan had other plans. Fiona called Sophie at night. The conversation was recorded in Sophie's phone notes written immediately after on March 1, 2019, at 4:17 p.m. Fiona Hughes sent Anthony Grant a message that sealed her fate. I'd love to see you Saturday. What Fiona didn't know was that Dylan Fletcher had never intended to take her to dinner. The hotel he booked wasn't in Toowoomba's town center. It was an isolated motel on the outskirts, the kind of place that asks no questions and keeps no cameras. And he'd only booked one room. March 10, 2019 began with hope. It would end in horror. Saturday, March 2nd, 2019. Fiona woke at 6:30 a.m. too excited to sleep. It had been years since she'd felt this hopeful, this eager. By 9:15 a.m., she was already carrying an overnight bag to her car. Ready for the trip, Patricia saw her leave. She was wearing a nice dress, blue with white flowers, and she'd done her hair. She looked happier than I'd seen her in years. She waved at me and said, "Wish 'em luck." I waved back. That was the last time I saw her alive. Fiona left Brisbane at 9:45 a.m. following the directions Dylan had sent her. The restaurant he promised was just beside Toowoomba, he said, an intimate, romantic spot he had been wanting to try. But Fiona was headed to something else entirely. Phone records showed Dylan called her twice during the drive to check-in. But Fiona never mentioned anything about being concerned. She was already on her way. At 10:37 a.m., Fiona shared her location with Sophie via WhatsApp. The pin dropped on the Wargo Highway, heading west, Sophie noticed immediately that her mother wasn't heading toward Toomba. She was heading past it toward the small town of Dalby. Her heart sank. She sent a text. "Mom, where are you going? That's not Toowoomba." Fiona replied quickly. "Anthony said the restaurant is just past the town. More private, more romantic. Don't worry. Love." Sophie's concern deepened. She tried calling, but Fiona didn't pick up. By then, it was too late to stop what was already set in motion. At 11:52 a.m., Fiona's car pulled into the gravel lot of the Sunset View Motor Inn, Arrondown establishment 15 kilometers outside Dalby. The inn was 6 rooms attached, toa, sagging office surrounded by empty fields. Dylan, dressed in slacks and a button-down, to maintain the illusion, met her in the parking lot. Witness later reported seeing them embrace. Shell looked happy. He looked focused. Bloke came in around 10:30, paid cash for room 4, gave a fake name, David something, said his wife would be arriving. Later, didn't think much of it. He seemed normal enough. At approximately 12:10 p.m., Fiona Hughes walked into room 4 off Sunset View Motor Inn. She would never walk out. For the first 30 minutes, Dylan maintained the performance. He offered her water from a bottle he'd opened. Beforehand, water litter found to contain crushed sedatives. He made small talk. He kept her calm. Fiona began to feel dizzy. Shelter told police in the brief window before she died that she asked to lie down. He helped her to the bed. She thought he was being kind. She thought was being kind. What happened next? We know from forensic examination and Fiona's own words to the first responders. Dylan Fletcher sexually assaulted her while she was incapacitated. When she began to regain consciousness and resist, he became violent. The forensic evidence tells Thebertle. Truth, blunt force trauma to her head, likely struck with the motel lamp, strangulation marks on her neck, and defensive wounds on her hands and forearms, showing she fought back with everything she had. Blood spatter in the room indicated a prolonged and violent tussle. At some point during this window, Fiona managed to reach her phone. At 1:47 p.m., she sent a text to Sophie that was never completed. "Sophie, help me." That was the last message Fiona Hughes ever sent. Medical examiners later determined that Fiona died between 2 o'clock and 2:30 p.m. on March 10, 2019. The cause of death, asphyxiation due to strangulation, compounded by blunt force trauma. Dylan Fletcher didn't panic. He'd done this for, not murder, but violence. He knew how to control a scene. He wiped down every surface, attempting to remove fingerprints. He took Fiona's phone, wallet, and jewelry, anything that might him to the scene. He changed his clothes, placing his bloodied shirt in a trash bag as though erasing every trace off the crime. At 2:43 p.m., Dylan Fletcher left room 4, captured by the manager's timestamp on the payment receipt. He came to the office, said they were checking out early. Something come up, handed me the key. Didn't make eye contact, got in his car, and left. Dylan Fletcher's actions were deliberate, methodical. He left no trace of himself behind except for Fiona's lifeless body abandoned in room 4. At 3:15 p.m., Sophie called her mother 12 times. No answer. At 4:00 p.m. she called the Dalby police. Officers arrived at the motel at 5:30 p.m. The manager opened room 4 at 5:47 p.m. Fiona's body was found on the bed, partially covered. The room marked by the aftermath of violence. At 7:23 p.m., 2 Queensland police officers arrived at Sophie's home in Perth. Before they could speak, she already knew. By 8 p.m. on March 2, 2019, a manhunt had begun. But Dylan Fletcher had already disappeared. Fiona Hughes was gone, and search for her killer had just begun. Forensic teams worked through the night. What they found painted a picture of calculation and rage. First, Fiona's phone was found in a trash can 3 kilometers from the motel. Dylan's fingerprints were found on the phone case, an undeniable link to the crime. Then, DNA evidence was uncovered. Blood and skin cells were found under Fiona's fingernails. These samples matched Dylan Fletcher's DNA. His identity confirmed 11 days later. Grainy CCTV footage from a service station 8 kilometers away showed Dylan's vehicle, captured on camera in the early hours after the murder. Then came financial records. The motel had been paid in cash, but Dylan had withdrawn $800 from an ATM in Brisbane the day before. The transaction was captured on camera, his face clear in the grainy footage. Piece by piece, the evidence was falling into place, and with each discovery, the walls began to close in on Dylan Fletcher. But the breakthrough came from digital forensics. When police asked Fiona's Facebook account, they found the entire message history with Anthony Grant. Dylan had created 14 different Facebook profiles over the last 3 years. 9 other women had filed police reports about suspicious contact. 2 women had been robbed after meeting him. 1 woman had been assaulted Buttescaped. She filed a report in 2017. Butte police hadn't connected the cases. Fiona wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one who didn't survive. With each woman, Dylan had refined his method until Fiona was the one who met a tragic end. Police released Dylan's photo to the media on March 5th. Warrants were issued for murder, sexual assault, and fraud. A $100,000 reward was offered for information. Tips flooded in. Dylan had been spotted in northern New South Wales, then Victoria, then back to Sydney. He was moving, staying with old contacts using prepaid phones. On March 14 police received a tip from a motel clerk in Wollongong. A man matching Dylan's description had checked in, paid cash, seemed nervous. At 6:15 a.m. on March 15th, 2019, tactical police surrounded room 9 of a budget motel in Wollongong. They gave Dylan Fletcher one chance to surrender. At 6:20 a.m., Dylan walked out. No resistance, no remorse, just a shrug. As if this was a minor inconvenience, Dylan Fletcher was captured. But his true nature was already clear. In the face of everything, he remained unfazed, a cold, calculated predator who saw his crime as nothing more than an inconvenience. In the interview room, Dylan initiated everything. Then, when presented with the forensic evidence, he changed tactics. The forensic evidence spoke louder than his words. The strangulation marks on Fiona's neck were inconsistent with panic. Sedatives had been found in her system, and defensive wounds. Prevej fought back, desperately trying to escape. This wasn't passion. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated murder with sexual violence as the precursor. As the evidence mounted against him, Dylan's attempts to justify his actions crumbled, revealing a man who had planned, manipulated, and ultimately murdered. Dylan Fletcher's trial began on November 4, 2019, in the Brisbane Supreme Court. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. 1b1, key witnesses came forward to testify. The defense tried to argue manslaughter, claiming Fiona had pre-existing health conditions, an argument that was disproven by medical evidence. They also suggested the encounter had been consensual, but gone wrong, a theory that was swiftly dismissed by the forensic evidence. On December 16, 2019, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned life imprisonment, non-parallel period, 30 years, concurrent sentence for other charges. Dylan Fletcher will be 75 years old. Before he's eligible for parole, Fiona Hughes was 59 when heckled her. Fiona's death became the catalyst for change, prompting several reforms in both law enforcement and in-line safety. Queensland established an in-line crimes task force. Facebook Australia increased verification requisite. New legislation was introduced, requiring dating apps to implement safety features. A national database for cross-referencing predatory behavior reports was created. Though no change can bring Fiona back, her death sparked a necessary shift in how online predators are identified, tracked, and held accountable. If Fiona's story could speak one final warning, it would be this: know the signs. These are the signs of a predator who is grooming their next victim, using calculated tactics to exploit vulnerabilities and create trust before they strike. Fiona's story is a painful reminder. No one deserves to feel like their vulnerability is a target. It's not weakness. It's a human need for connection, and that need should never be exploited. Your safety is not negotiable. If you're using social media or dating apps, follow these rules like your life depends on it, because it might. Always reverse image search profile photos. Google Images or TinyEye can help you spot stolen or fake pictures. Request a video call. Before meeting. In person, if they refuse or give excuses, walk away. Always tell a trusted friend or family member your plans, where you're going, and who you're meeting. Share your live location with someone you trust so they can track your safety in real time. Google their phone and number to see if it appears in scam reports to search their name, location, and any arrest or court records that might exist. And above all, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it's wrong. Always meet in a public place, preferably somewhere busy like a cafe or restaurant with cameras. Prefer data meetings. It's safer and gives you more options for help if needed. Drive yourself. Never let the other person pick you up on the first meeting. Keep your phone charged and easily accessible in case you need help. Set check-in times with a friend. Have a code word ready in case you feel unsafe. Stay sober enough to make good decisions. Don't let yourself get too impaired. Don't lend money, especially early in a relationship. This is often a flag for scams. Fiona Hughes was a teacher who believed in second chances. She gave Dylan Fletcher a chance he never deserved. But her death doesn't have to be meaningless. Loneliness is real. The desire for connection is human. But predators know this, and they exploit it. Fiona Hughes wasn't naive. She wasn't stupid. She was lonely, and that's not a crime. But Dylan Fletcher made it her death sentence. If you take away one thing from the story, let it be this: your safety matters more than politeness, more than not wanting to seem paranoid, more than not wanting to hurt someone's feelings. The man who killed Fiona Hughes counted on her being too kind to question him. Don't make that mistake, because the person on the other side of that screen might be exactly who they say they are, or they might be Dylan Fletcher. If this story made you think twice about that friend request, that's good. That's the point. Share this video with someone who uses social media. Subscribe to this channel for more true crime investigations that don't just tell stories, they give you tools to protect yourself. Drop a comment and tell us what warning sign do you think people ignore most often. Your answer might save someone's.